The October day that Josh Marks died was not the first time he'd pointed a gun at himself and pulled the trigger. Just months before, he shot himself in the ear while sitting in his car. According to Chicago Magazine, his family believes it was either a suicide attempt or a desperate act to quiet the voices in his head. Afterward, when Marks made a call on a University of Chicago emergency phone, he attacked the campus officer who responded and tried to take his gun. It ultimately took a second officer with pepper spray and being tackled by 3 additional officers to subdue him. After being taken for treatment for his injuries, Marks was charged with felony assault against a police officer locked up in the general population at the Cook County Jail. This isn't just Josh Marks' story. Increasingly, this is also the story of America's institutional response to people who are mentally ill. A 911 call that brings the police instead of the paramedics, and a health crisis that lands the person suffering not in a hospital, but in a jail. How prepared or ill-prepared are police officers on the street to cope with a moment like Josh Marks, someone who is not homicidal but is suicidal, who is mentally ill?
Josh Marks doesn't need the police. Josh Marks needs a reliable mental health infrastructure that is missing in the country. And what you really have to call this is deliberate indifference. We have this notion that we have 17,000 police departments that can all sort of find their own policies. So until it happens in somebody's town that a mentally ill person is hurt by the police or killed by the police, we shrug. The reality is the police are the worst equipped people to be dealing with these issues. They bring deadly force into these situations. They're oriented towards force. They're oriented towards thinking about law breaking rather than in a caring kind of capacity. So this repeatedly disregarding the reality that we have this huge problem. And by the way, we are not only not tackling this. There's a report this past week that says more and more cities are criminalizing homelessness.
Yes, right.
So that's going to put the police directly in contention with people that need help that does not involve the police.
Well, and in fact, we saw just in recent weeks the kind of sickening video of the woman being beaten by a police officer. We know that that is a circumstance of someone who is mentally ill, and so we see that, and of course the first response. I mean, it's again hard to even look at, but I do keep wondering. So, is this a training issue? Is this because she should never have been there, because she should have been in a caring mental health environment? What is the solution to a moment like that?
Training probably is one of the issues. I mean, there could be a plethora of issues, but police officers really do need to be trained on how to recognize the signs when they're dealing with someone in a crisis, a mental health crisis, in discern whether that's criminal behavior or it's mental health issues.
But you're saying there's always a presumption of the criminal and of the force rather than of the caring.
It's awfully hard for police officers in real time to go from the enforcement kind of force-oriented mindset that they bring in. But it's absolutely true that the more they know about mental health, they don't have to be experts. The more they know, the more they feel comfortable. It fills the vacuum of fear that otherwise is there. And sometimes with the mentally ill, that's your worst enemy. Not knowing, fearing the worst, having a very little bit of information often can be a very powerful tool for the police.
Jonathan.
Well, the mental illness stigma is also a story about race, and it's pretty unavoidable if you look at also the stories about Rikers this week and other kinds of stories. And I speak a lot, as you know, to psychiatrists and police officers, and in my book, The Protest Psychosis. And what I argue is that if you want to train police officers or doctors to intervene into mental illness stigma, increasingly in the society, stigma is very closely aligned to racism. Yep. And this is really a story about
the ability to see that African-American woman as sick, not as dangerous, to see Josh Marks, who's a very tall, big kid on the south side of Chicago, your presumption is that kid is homicidal, not suicidal.
And in a way, we've changed the treatment system from one of caring or recovery to one of incarceration in a way. Automatically, the automatic response is that this angry black man in front of me is a criminal, and if he's acting crazy, we're going to do something about it. And so really, to address the question of mental illness stigma in this way, we also have to have a deeper conversation about the ways that race and mental illness stigma intersect.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit here about race and mental illness stigma intersecting when the viewer is particularly a white police officer. But what about race and mental health stigma within the community itself and the challenge of getting help and assistance, because we sometimes don't see, as you pointed out, the destructive behaviors. We see them as bad actions rather than as responses to illness, to depression, to psychosis.
Exactly. That's very prevalent in our neighborhood. Stigma is a barrier to getting the help that they need, and that's so unfortunate. If I can get a message out there to these young people who don't really know what's going on with them, but know there's something that's not right, they need to please talk to somebody to help them get the help that they need instead of trying to take care of it themselves. I mean, surely I think Josh was trying to take care of it himself, but he just couldn't. His mother was trying to help, he just couldn't.
And yet, as you point out, the ability to go get the help that you need has everything to do with whether or not you have insurance, whether or not you live in a city where there is public. I mean, this is a structural question. So how do we also push the policymakers to do that work?
It's a human dignity question. The people who can really step up here are police chiefs and sheriffs. Some of them have, they need to do more. They know this is the wrong idea, to be criminalizing people that need help. The jailers in particular know, when they look in their jail population, how prevalent these issues are. And by the way, law enforcement has its own depression issues, speaking of mental health.
Yeah. You know, I like that idea in part because if there is stigma for the mentally ill, there's also still a kind of position that law enforcement officers have that is not stigmatized. And so to the extent that law enforcement officers can be the ones out front calling for something different, maybe it would lead to the sort of policy changes that we need. I have no time. I take 2-hour shows and still feel like I have no time. So I want to thank my guests for joining me this morning, Jonathan Metzl and Donna Barnes, also Eugene O'Donnell, just for beginning to touch this very important topic. There is more ahead. Please stay with us.